The crystal chandelier above the Tidesbury dining hall didn't simply glow that night. It watched. Every hand-cut prism scattered light across the room like shattered glass, throwing sharp reflections over the faces of people who had shared meals with me for more than a decade without ever truly seeing me. The entire hall smelled of expensive wine, polished wood, and carefully maintained appearances. To everyone else, it looked elegant. To me, it felt like a museum dedicated to my invisibility. I stood near the edge of the massive mahogany table, holding a heavy ceramic salad bowl so tightly my fingers had gone pale around the edges. The scent of roasted pine nuts and imported balsamic floated upward, but all I could really taste was the bitterness sitting at the back of my throat after years of swallowing. Disrespect. My mother-in-law Beverly didn't even bother looking at me. She was too busy admiring the watch on one of the guests across the table, smiling with the polished cruelty she had perfected over decades of climbing social ladders and stepping on whoever happened to be underneath her. Without lifting her eyes, she waved one manicured hand toward the sideboard at the far end of the room. The gesture was careless, dismissive, the kind of motion people use for servants or furniture. Just leave it on the sideboard. Elena, she said smoothly, sipping her Chardonnay. The help shouldn't hover around the guests. The room instantly went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died in place. I could feel the attention turn toward me like heat from an open oven. Some faces showed embarrassment. Others showed amusement. Most looked relieved it wasn't happening to them. But the one stare I felt most was Julian's. My husband, the man who had spent 10 years watching me manage billion-dollar transportation systems, oversee impossible engineering deadlines, and hold entire projects together under pressure that would crush most people. Yet somehow, when it came to defending me from his mother,
he always became silent. He lowered his eyes to his plate as if a single asparagus spear had suddenly become the most fascinating
object in the world. I didn't walk toward the sideboard. I didn't shrink. I didn't tremble. Instead, I walked directly to the head of the table, heels striking against the limestone floor in slow, measured steps. Every guest followed me with their eyes as I placed the bowl directly in front of Beverly. Clack. The sharp sound echoed across the dining hall, making the wine ripple inside her glass. For the first time all evening, she looked at me. Really looked at me, and I looked right back. I let the quiet daughter-in-law mask slide away completely. You're right, Beverly, I said calmly, my voice smooth and cold as ice against crystal. The help shouldn't eat with the guests. I paused just long enough for the silence to tighten, but the owner should. The room froze. And as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I continued, I own this entire resort. Every room. Every bottle in the cellar. Every stone beneath your feet. Including the chair you're sitting in. No one moved. No one breathed. Mackenzie's mouth dropped open so dramatically it looked painful. Beverly's hand tightened around her wine glass as if she physically needed something to hold on to. I didn't stay to watch the damage spread across the table. I had spent too many years explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. Instead, I turned and walked out of the dining hall, my heels clicking against the polished floor with the steady rhythm of a countdown. Most people would have stayed. Argued. Demanded apologies. Begged for basic respect. But systems engineers don't solve structural collapse by screaming at broken steel. You isolate the failure, you reroute the power, and you rebuild without the weak points. By 12:03 that night, I sat alone in the estate library with my laptop open in front of me. The rest of the resort slept beneath the sound of crashing Pacific waves, but the glow of the screen painted the room in cold blue light. Outside the windows, the estate looked peaceful. Inside the system, everything was bleeding. This wasn't revenge. It was an audit. For 11 years, I had quietly carried this family on my back while they treated me like temporary staff. I fixed their financial disasters, paid for emergencies they never noticed, covered bills they pretended didn't exist. I funded the luxury image they loved so much while they acted embarrassed whenever I entered the room. They thought I was quiet because I was weak. In reality, I was quiet because I was calculating. My fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as I logged into the Tide's Berry Management Network. 6 months earlier, through a holding company nobody connected to me, I had quietly acquired the debt crushing the resort, while Beverly obsessed over gala invitations and social rankings. I was signing the documents that made me the legal owner of everything she considered her kingdom. I checked my pulse on my watch. 72 beats per minute. Steady. Controlled. Crying wastes energy during a corporate takeover. I opened the permanent resident access panel. The Vance family privileges filled the screen immediately. Complimentary suites, unlimited spa access, private chef authorization, exclusive beach cabanas, premium account exemptions, years of luxury, years of free living while the resort drowned financially behind the scenes. I highlighted the entire block. Delete. One click. Gone. Done. I opened the beach club records. Beverly's favorite cabana appeared instantly. The same cabana where she once made me stand in direct sunlight for hours holding an umbrella because the automated shade system malfunctioned. And she didn't want her skin exposed to sunlight. I marked the cabana unavailable due to structural safety concerns. Technically, it wasn't a lie. The structural integrity of this family had collapsed years ago. I was simply updating the paperwork to reflect reality. Next came the security systems. WAF permissions, biometric gate access, master.
Key protocols. Every code connected to the Vance family disappeared one by one beneath my fingertips. By sunrise.
They wouldn't just be spoiled residents overstaying their welcome. They would become unauthorized occupants inside a fortress that no longer recognized their names. The library remained silent except for the soft tapping of keys and the distant sound of the ocean outside. To them, I had always been the mouse. That was Mackenzie's nickname for me after a hot mic accidentally recorded her mocking me during Christmas dinner last year. According to her, I was the boring wife with sensible shoes and a forgettable tech job. They never cared enough to ask what I actually did. While they obsessed over designer handbags and yacht parties, I was designing transportation systems moving millions of people across the coast every single day. They lived in a world built entirely on appearances. I lived in a world built on infrastructure. Load-bearing walls, power, systems. Data networks, things that actually mattered, while Beverly secretly sold off vintage jewelry online to stop her credit cards from being declined. I was building the digital framework behind $500 million infrastructure projects. I didn't spend my bonuses on status symbols. I bought assets. Land. Control. Freedom. The acquisition fund alone had cost over $14 million. And still, they treated me like hired help carrying salad bowls into dinner parties. For years, I kept rescuing them. I paid for Mackenzie's influencer retreat in Tulum. After her cards failed at check-in because she couldn't bear looking poor in front of her followers, I quietly replenished Julian's savings account 3 separate times. After he overspent on classic cars trying to impress people who never respected him anyway. I thought that was what marriage meant. Supporting the people you loved. What I failed to understand was that they didn't love me. They loved access to. Julian was the hardest part of the equation. Not cruel, not malicious, just trapped. Every dinner, every insult, every humiliating moment. He sat frozen beside me like a man locked behind invisible bars. And finally, sitting there alone in the library, I understood why Beverly hadn't simply raised a son. She had built a prison around him, one emotional brick at a time. When children grow up under someone who punishes independence like betrayal, they eventually stop resisting altogether. They learn silence is safer than conflict. Julian didn't stay quiet because he agreed with her. He stayed quiet because fear had become his native language. But understanding his prison didn't mean I had to keep living inside it with him. My compassion had been stretched beyond its limits for over a decade, and now the account was empty. I closed my laptop slowly. For 11 years, I had been the invisible mechanism keeping their entire world functioning. The quiet ghost inside the machine. The person making sure the lights stayed on while everyone else took credit for the brightness. But eventually, ghosts stop haunting places that never loved them back. They leave. And when the foundation disappears, the entire structure begins to shake. The next morning, The air inside the estate felt heavy enough to choke on. I stood alone in the kitchen, pouring black coffee when I heard the familiar sharp clicking of Mackenzie's heels approaching down the hallway. She entered carrying her phone mounted on a gimbal. Ring light already attached and glowing in front of her face. Of course, not a single question. About last night. Not one word about Beverly calling me the help. Not even concern over the fact I now own the resort they lived in. Because in Mackenzie's world, reality only mattered if it generated content. She pointed the camera at me while I was rinsing a mug. And here we have the assistant in her natural habitat. Mackenzie chirped into the lens, her voice reaching that high-pitched performative tone she used for her 300,000 followers. Point of view. When your brother's wife tries to claim she owns the place because she had one too many mimosas at brunch, isn't she precious? So dedicated to the aesthetic of service. She was monetizing my humiliation in real time. This was the Vance family brand extraction. They extracted my labor, my silence, and now my dignity for digital engagement. A chime echoed from my pocket. It was the family group chat. Beverly had pinned a message at the very top for everyone to see. Regarding Elena's unfortunate outburst last night, we believe the altitude and the stress of her little project at work have caused a temporary mental episode. Please treat her with the gentle pity she deserves. Julian and I have decided to overlook her delusions for the sake of the family gala tonight. The gaslighting was masterful. In one paragraph, Beverly had transformed my factual ownership into a psychiatric symptom. She wasn't just ignoring the truth. She was rewriting reality to keep her hierarchy intact. I looked at Mackenzie through the chrome reflection of the espresso machine. She thought she was the director of this story. She thought I was just a prop in her day in the life of a socialite vlog. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The heat was grounding. Anger is a volatile fuel. It burns out too fast and leaves too much ash. I was switching to something more sustainable. Cold corporate execution. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't the group chat this time. It was an encrypted message from Ethan, the property manager I had secretly retained 3 months ago. Management files prepped. Legal team is on standby at the gate. We're ready when you are, boss. The manager's office was a sanctuary of glass and dark oak, tucked away from the sprawling, noisy opulence of the main guest wings. When I walked in, Ethan didn't stand up to give me a polite guest-facing smile. He simply pushed a heavy leather binder across the desk toward me. The holding company is officially the sole owner, Elena. The deed was recorded and the title cleared. At 4:02 p.m. yesterday, I opened the binder. The pages were a symphony of cold, hard facts. For years, Beverly had treated the North Wing as her personal boarding house, charging her socialite friends maintenance fees that never actually touched the resort's accounts. Mackenzie had been using the grand ballroom for influencer events. That cost the resort $11,000 in labor, catering, and security, all billed to an account that didn't exist, effectively stealing from the resort's operational budget. It's a parasite-host relationship. Ethan, I said, my thumb tracing the red ink on the balance sheets. I let myself imagine a counterfactual, a world where I hadn't made this move. I saw a version of myself 10 years from now, still clearing plates, still shrinking my shoulders, so I wouldn't take up too much space in Beverly's peripheral vision. I saw a woman whose name had been completely erased, replaced by the title of Julian's quiet wife. If I hadn't bought this resort, I wouldn't just be losing a house. I'd be losing my soul to a family that viewed my existence as a utility. The move is total restructuring, I said, my voice sharp and clinical. I want notice to quit documents drafted for every single Vance family suite. No exceptions, no legacy discounts. If they can't show a paid and full receipt for the last 3 years of occupancy by tomorrow morning, they are trespassers. But the audit revealed something much darker than simple greed. Ethan slid a folder marked Vance Family Trust. Special disbursements toward me. For years, Beverly hadn't just been spending the family trust. She'd been forged her dead husband's signature to drain the tax reserves. $900,000 earmarked for property tax stabilization had been withdrawn 6 months after he was buried. She forged it, I said. looking at the jagged forced lines of the signature. And she was using the Tisbury's operational accounts to launder those withdrawals, disguising them as consulting fees for shell companies she controlled. It's tax evasion. On a federal level, the Vances weren't just ungrateful, they were criminals. Julian's digital signature was on the secondary approvals. Whether he knew it or not, whether he had just mindlessly clicked approve because his mother told him to, his name was on the trail of blood and ink. They aren't just losing their rooms, Ethan, I said, closing the folder with a definitive snap. They're losing their masks. This isn't a family drama anymore. It's a criminal investigation. The gala was a sea of silk, champagne, and stolen prestige. It was the social event of the season, and Beverly stood at the center of it all, her glass raised high, bathing in the admiration of guests who didn't know they were drinking wine bought with forged checks. To heritage, Beverly proclaimed, her voice echoing off the high, vated ceilings. To the Vance legacy, which stands as firm as the cliffs beneath us. I didn't wait for the applause. I stepped onto the D's at the front of the room. I wasn't wearing the navy mouse dress they expected. I was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal silk suit, the kind of outfit a woman wears when she's about to sign a treaty or declare war. I had kept it hidden in my luggage for this exact second. The room fell into a breathless hush. Beverly's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold as stones. Elena, dear, you've had your little moment of drama. Sit down. Before you embarrass Julian further. We're in the middle of a toast. I didn't sit. I took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whine was sharp, cutting through the socialite chatter like a scalpel. The Vance legacy isn't standing on cliffs. Beverly, I said, my voice projected with the steady, unshakable authority of a woman who manages $500 million budgets. It's standing on $900,000 of forged signatures and $110,000 in unpaid property taxes that I just settled this morning. And unfortunately for you, the ground just gave way. I pulled a stack of documents from my portfolio, the notice to quit orders and the forensic audit summaries. I handed the top sheet to Beverly. What is this nonsense? She hissed, her face turning a sickly ashen shade of gray as her eyes scanned the bank records. That is your eviction notice, I said, making sure the microphone caught every word for the guests to hear. And those are the wire transfer records for the tax laundering you've been running through this resort's accounts. Accounts that, as of yesterday afternoon, belong to me. Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of pure panic. Elena, stop this. This is private. We can talk about this in the library. We're done talking, Julian, I said, looking at him with a pity that hurt. Worse than anger. You spent 10 years watching me clear the plates. Now you can watch me clear the house. I turned back to the room. The Vance family lease is terminated, effective immediately. Security is currently stationed at the North Wing Suites. You have exactly 30 minutes to gather your personal items. Anything left behind, the furniture, the art, the legacy, will be seized and auctioned to offset the debt you owe this estate. Mackenzie started to scream, her phone dropping to the floor, the screen finally going dark as it hit the marble. Beverly looked at the crowd, her friends, her peers, the people she had looked down upon, and saw only the reflected horror of her own exposure. She tried to maintain her posture, but the shadow class she had mocked for so long was now the only force keeping her from falling. 30 minutes, Beverly, I said, leaning in, so only she could hear me. The help doesn't wait. And neither do I. I stepped off the D's and walked through the parting crowd. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't apologizing for the space I occupied. I was the architect, and I had just demolished a house of cards to build something real. The tide's barrier is quiet now. The constant buzzing noise of the Vance family's demands has been replaced by the sound of the ocean. Julian is gone. He went with his mother, still unable to break the tether, even as it dragged him into a legal nightmare. The North Wing is currently being renovated. I'm turning it into a creative residency and a hub for young architects and engineers. People who actually build things instead of just consuming them. I sat on the cliffside this morning with a coffee, the wind whipping off the Pacific. I opened My old Vance family spreadsheet on my laptop. I looked at the names, the debts, the years of overlooked slights. I didn't feel a single sting of regret. I didn't feel the need to cry. I just felt the immense quiet satisfaction of a complex system finally brought back into balance. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I selected the entire directory.
I hit
Delete. If this story hit close to home, hit the subscribe button. I have more stories of reclaimed power to tell. What would you do if you found out your in-laws were stealing from you? Let's discuss below.